and welcome to another edition of the District of Sports podcast. I'm George Gerbo. A reminder that you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search District of Sports in your favorite podcast app, and to find all of our coverage of the DC sports scene at washingtontimes.com/sports. Speaking of the DC sports scene, the DC team perhaps the most in flux right now is the Washington Wizards. New president Michael Winger and new general manager Will Dawkins have ripped up the carpet and taken down the drapes, proverbially speaking, of the seemingly stuck in neutral Wizards. They sent franchise cornerstone Bradley Beal to Phoenix, traded Kristaps Porzingis to Boston in a pair of three-team deals. They got a bevy of draft picks in return and some other assets, including newcomer Bilal Coulibaly via a trade in the recent NBA draft. It's strange to see any team strip everything down to the bolts and do a complete rebuild without a top 3 draft pick and with a bad, but yet not the absolute worst record in the league. But after missing the playoffs in 4 of the last 5 years, drastic change was definitely needed, and the dust is still settling from the flurry of moves, with potentially more on the horizon. Joining me to break down what I call the wonderful world of the Washington Wizards is Alex Flum, sports reporter and sports anchor at DC News Now in the District. Alex, good to see you. Good to talk with you.
George, good to be on here with you, as well as being fellow Terps. It's always nice to do this.
Absolutely. We stick close. We stick close, us Maryland guys. So much appreciated it. That's a good it's a good transition segue to start. You not only cover sports in this region, you grew up in this region, you went to school in this region, and have followed the Wizards for a long time, and now get to cover them professionally. So you've seen during your lifetime, kind of the highs and lows of this team, from the Gilbert Arenas years and how exciting that team was, and obviously a lot of, matchups with LeBron James when he was in Cleveland and everything. And then some of the antics that went along with the Gilbert Arenas years, bit of a tear down. They rebuild, drafting John Wall, number 1 overall. And those Wall years were really good. And the team moved on from him after that 2017 season, where they were into the 7th game against Boston for a chance to go to the Eastern Conference Finals. They thought they were going to regroup and rebuild around Bradley Beal, and now here we are this offseason, and the full, or as close as you can get to a full teardown for the Wizards, is on, with Bradley Beal gone and Kristaps Porzingis gone. I guess just off the top, was this the right time to do this for the Wizards, to make this move? They do it without a top 3 pick, when you see a lot of these younger teams like, New Orleans, Zion Williamson, and of course he's had some injury problems and whatnot, but when we've seen him play, he's really been dynamic. For Orlando, Paolo Banchero, Rookie of the Year, extremely talented, bright future, looks like he could be a star in this league. The Wizards admittedly unloaded these assets in Beal and Porzingis without being able to get much in return, based on no trade clauses and bad contracts and what have you. Was this the right time to do this for the Wizards after only one playoff appearance in the last 5 seasons for them?
Yeah, well, I think the situation that this new front office, Michael Winger, Will Dawkins and company, came in is, when a team generally rebuilds, they have all the assets they can make different moves, trade people away, bring in a lot of things, but they were kind of cleaning up a mess, right? It's important to remember here that Bradley Beal has had, whatever you want to call it, with the Wizards, one of the worst contracts in the NBA, paying him a ton of money, supermax, whatever, and then he has the no trade clause where he can veto a trade to any team he wants. So Beal had a lot of leverage in where he could go. It's possible they had better offers than what they had from the Suns, but in the end, it seems like that was the only option, the only route they could go. So I think the front office recognized that Bradley Beal is only getting older. He's had a lot of injury problems, and if he comes out and gets injured first month, misses a bunch of games like he's done just about every year, then they get in a position where, are they even going to be able to move Beal? What are they going to be able to get for Beal? So they got a bunch of pick swaps, a slew of second-round picks, turned it. It's got Chris Paul somewhere in there, turned that into other pieces, Jordan Poole coming in. I almost forget the question exactly because it's so much to talk about. But
There's so much going on.
yeah, but I think it's what they had to do, and I think that front office was really cleaning up the mess that was left by the regimes of Ernie Grunfeld and Tommy Shepard. It almost seemed like if you go back, and it was funny you brought up the highs and the lows. Is yes, they were highs for the Wizards, but in terms of success in the NBA standards, it was never really a big high. It was more so you're going up the mountain and you're halfway there and you never get past the halfway. You talked about how I've grown up around here and watched this team for many years. I'm in my mid, I guess almost late 20s now, and I have never seen this team get past the second round of the playoffs. And
Hmm.
that's pretty crazy. Like you mentioned, that game 7 in the second round, that has been the pinnacle for the Wizards. And in professional sports, the second round of playoffs to be your pinnacle is kind of unacceptable. You strive for a championship. So I think this group that's come in is they have their mindset on get a championship to the city. And that's what Michael Winger said. So I think it was the right thing for them to do. It was, and they had to do it now rather than later, I think is what they all realized when they got in.
It's crazy to think, again within this last decade, like I think iconic Wizard memories of the last decade. It's John Wall on the scorers table in that Boston series after he kind of took over and pretty much dragged them as far as he could. John Wall winning the dunk contest, and Paul Pierce. I called game against Atlanta way a few years before that, which was another chance for them to in the second round. And they still couldn't get past that second round hurdle. Ernie Grunfeld was there as general manager for a decade, and a lot of people, there would ding his performance there. There were some misses in terms of, Jan Vesely was a top 5 draft pick, and it just didn't work out with the organization. Um, Tommy Shepard comes along, and even in, the most memorable year in this last like 5 for the Wizards, weirdly, is that lone Russell Westbrook year. I'm like, when I'm watching this team, I was like, at least they're entertaining. There's something there. They're scoring 130 points plus against the Nets, and it's Beal and Westbrook and Rui, and eventually they decide, okay, it's they part with Rui, and then he goes out to LA and nearly makes a run. Helps the Lakers out there and gets to have LeBron James as a running mate with Los Angeles. So they've drafted some guys that probably some NBA analysts would say, oh, you've taken a chance on them, and they just don't pan out or they don't develop here and they end up elsewhere. Does, with a new structure in place where you've got Michael Winger as kind of a president of basketball operations, Will Dawkins as a general manager, in your initial, just read of it and having covered some of the press conferences and whatnot, does it seem like that maybe is going to be a better setup for the Wizards as opposed to just delegating all the basketball authority to a general manager type of person, where now you've got maybe some banter allowed between the two of them to try to evaluate a better strategy for players and prospects and who you want to bring to this team?
I think it's absolutely a better situation. If you think about not just sports, anything in life, if it's one person making a decision without any help or any consultations, I think you always want to have more people at the table to help make that decision. It's not just, Winger and Dawkins, Travis Schlenk as well in the front office staff coming from the Hawks. So the three of them, kind of that new big three in DC, I guess they always going back all the way to Arenas, Jameson, and Butler, or whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it, with Beal, Kuzma, and Porzingis the last couple of years. But the front office has now kind of become the big three, and Michael Winger, he went to the University of Maryland Business School. He has a salary cap trade uh, value mindset that not every basketball minded GM has. Will Dawkins has more of that basketball background. He spent a lot of years working his way up in the Oklahoma City Thunder system, their front office, becoming their general manager or getting up there eventually. And he comes in with that basketball mindset. Travis Schlenk, it's been said he's a really good evaluator of basketball talent. And another thing is they've come from different markets. Obviously, Michael Winger was also in OKC, has been in a few stops, but he comes from the Clippers. That's a big market. Dawkins coming from OKC, which is a smaller market, Schlenk coming from Atlanta, which is a media market. So they know how to get it done in different places. In DC, obviously, we're a big market here, but when it comes to the NBA, not a lot of guys always want to sign here. So it feels like not as big of a market. So they know how to build different teams. They know how to do it differently. They all come with different assets and different mindsets to the table. So I think putting their three heads together, I think can only be a good thing for the Wizards.
I like that point that you get that with the Nationals sometimes too, that it'll feel like they're competing on the level of, like say a Pittsburgh or a Tampa sometimes as a quote unquote small market, even though, it's obviously one of the biggest cities in the country and the capital of the nation. And yet also with the Wizards, it's like, oh, all these people are going to LA. They want to go to Miami. The Knicks are brought up in any type of free agency thing because it's the Knicks, even though they haven't won anything in a long, long, long time. And Washington's never in those conversations about that. And maybe some of that culture can change with new leadership. Speaking of, new leadership, they're going to have new leadership on the floor this season. Kyle Kuzma re-ups 4 years, $102 million. So it's good that there's some kind of returning piece because the rest of it around him is going to look, incredibly different. Jordan Poole comes in as part of the multiple things. It's fun. I want to see somebody at Capital One Arena this year wearing a Chris Paul Wizards jersey for the, I don't know, 4 days, 5 days that he was here before he was sent from Phoenix, before he was sent to California to become a Warrior. And Jordan Poole comes back, and of course, started being on the outs last year. The highly reported secret leaked video of him and Draymond Green getting into an altercation during one of their practices. And so Jordan Poole gets a fresh start in Washington. Tyus Jones comes via Memphis as part of that whole Porzingis 3-team trade. How does that shape up when you actually get around to playing these games and when they finally get to suit up with each other, and kind of more importantly, looking at the young guys that are going to surround them? And I'm thinking specifically of Denny Advia, who was very highly touted for his defense last year, lacks a little bit in the scoring, but has developed and evolved in his first couple of years in the NBA. You add to that Bilal Koulibaly, who was teammates with Victor Wembanyama in France. Victor Wembanyama, of course, the standout for number 1 overall pick for the Spurs. And so the Wizards, with a draft and a trade, get Koulibaly to join. And then also, I'm still excited or trying to figure out what we're going to see out of Johnny Davis, who was Washington's number 1 pick last year out of Wisconsin, and spent a lot of last season in the G League. Played a couple of games, I think, later in the season with Washington. But how does that, it's way early here before the season gets started, a few months, but this roster moving forward, what are those pieces do you see making an impact? Who are some of the guys that are going to take leads and be stars on this team when they finally start the regular season in a couple months?
Well, first off, I think the big thing I would say to people is don't get used to this roster. If you look at what the Oklahoma City Thunder have been like the last several years, Will Dawkins has been a big part of rebuilding them, and now you look at them. I mean, they were in the play-in this year. They brought in a guy like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander to kind of be,
Super fun to watch,
yeah,
yeah, and
kind
really
of
talented
be
player.
one of their key pieces at the start of their rebuild. And I think the Wizards maybe kind of see Jordan Poole as kind of being that Shea type of player that could maybe develop into a star that they would have on their hands. The Kuzma thing was surprising. I did not expect him to re up, but I think the way the front office saw it was, if he leaves, we get nothing for him. If we sign him and trade him at the All-Star break, we get something. So I think they're very focused on accumulating as many assets as they can. And I think they see the roster now as a lot of people that could be traded in the next couple of years if they see fit. They'll decide who they want to keep around and build with, but and the roster right now may not even look like at the beginning of the season what it looks like now. I still think there could be more trades to come. Keep in mind, Daniel Gafford's still on this roster; he could be traded. DeLon Wright is very likely to be traded going into this season. So like we said, Chris Paul was on the team for 4 days or whatever. you know, it didn't even seem like he was safe on this roster, and he wasn't because they turned him into Jordan Poole and more pieces and all that. So I would be surprised if Kuzma's not dealt either this season or the next season. But you never know. Maybe Kuzma continues to develop and they want to keep him around. But um, I, this roster, I think, is very much in flux. And I think this is not going to be a team that's going to win a lot of games, but you never know. They could come out and compete and eventually end out competing for a play-in spot in the play-in. But I do think that this is a roster in flux. I think there's going to be a lot of youth development. It'll be very interesting to see how Bilal Coulibaly does, how like you said, how Denny progresses, how Corey Kispert progresses. Johnny Davis, his rookie season was considered disappointing. It'll be interesting to see if he can take a bigger step forward. So I'll be very interested to see how this roster does. But I definitely think it's very much in flux.
Yeah, it's kind of like life in today's NBA, where with the play-in, you get 10 teams that are quote unquote 10 out of 15 in each league or each conference that can get into the playoffs, and so Washington at 35-47 misses it last year, but add 4 wins to that, and they become kind of closer to a 500 team, and even with a below 500 record, you can still be in. And then the flip side of that is, well, your lottery pick is like in the 8 to 15 range, or 8 to 12 range, which is kind of where Washington's was. That kind of leads me into my last point in looking at this, looking at the Wizards here, and it comes on the bench, their leader Wes Unseld Jr., who of course, dad, legendary figure, arguably the best greatest player in the franchise's history, coached, played, world champion, Washington's only title back in the 70s. I'm curious if under a new ownership structure, do they have as much either deference or willingness to let the son of a franchise legend kind of, because he was an assistant, in the NBA before he came to Washington. Of course, the tie made a lot of sense. Let's get a young guy in here after Scott Brooks. And does Wes have a little bit of leeway to work with this roster that's in so much flux, or is he someone also that potentially could be another part of the roster that changes over here in the next season or two?
Well, I think also Wes was an assistant with the Wizards in the past as well. So there was a lot of respect that some of these guys on the team when he first came back had for him already. And I think the players do respect him. I think just like anyone in a new role, he's had his growing pains and learning. It almost reminds me of the Nationals in a way. Obviously, last year they traded everyone away, and then Davies sitting here with this new look roster, and it's like, what are you supposed to do? And you look at them, I think Davies considering the situation, some people might not agree, but I think he's done a fantastic job this season. And yes, you look at the standings, they're pretty close to the bottom, but I think we all thought the Nats would be historically bad this year, and they haven't been historically bad. They've just been plain bad.
Plain bad, yeah.
And
Oakland is historically
exactly.
bad.
And I think with the Wizards, I think Wes is in that situation now too, where they don't necessarily need to make the playoffs because there's not really an expectation, I think, for that at this point. I think they recognize it's going to be a sort of a slower rebuild here. It's not going to happen overnight. So I think there's not as much pressure for Wes as you might think. Now, I think if this team comes out and wins 15 games, I think he's gone. But I think if they can be competitive, if the youth can develop, and we were just talking about it before we came on here today, the new coaching staff as well. They brought in Brian Keefe, who Kevin Durant said this week that he is responsible for everything he's ever learned or something like that.
Yeah, his success, yeah.
Yeah, and he's really been a defensive specialist, which is something that'll be helpful for the Wizards. And then other coach Vanderpool coming in, a local guy, went to Blair High School, so he'll bring more to the staff. He's been around the NBA, so Wes will have some help in here this year at least. They rebuilt his staff, and that'll help him. I mean, he'll have the support of the front office, I think. Kuzma coming back will help. Jordan Poole's a very good player. Tyus Jones as well coming in. So I don't know if this is necessarily a make or break year, but I think if there's not any progress this year, then the next year there's no progress to that. I think at that point, I think they'll probably want to see a trajectory of things improving the next couple of years. But I think he's more of a guy that has 2 more years than 1 more year, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would think they'd give him a little bit of the benefit just because sometimes you see like when they come in, new general management or new basketball leadership like that, and it's just like, do we strip it down and start over? And
Mhm.
in other sports, like when we cover college football or whatnot, like new athletic director, whatever, usually means, hey, I didn't hire this guy, and that means the current coach is on the clock more so than he would have been under the previous guy, who of course has a little bit of relationship and deference to. So I hope he gets a little bit of a chance, because kind of to your point, it's I don't want to ding him for like, oh, this roster should have been this many wins and he was a bad coach. No, it's just like you get the cards you're dealt sometimes, and through some bad previous management, these were the cards that West was dealt, and I think he can work with it as best as he can. It'd be interesting to see, especially with younger guys, maybe without an ego. In some cases, you can massage the roster a little bit and get the best you can out of it. But basketball, a little bit away. But the Wizards, as Alex put it, keep watching them to see where they end up. Alex, I thank you for joining me. Let people know where they can find your work and tune into your coverage.
Yeah, George, I appreciate it again. You can find me on whatever social media there is nowadays. I can't keep track anymore with this
It's very hard.
Threads and Twitter business. So if you look up Alex Flum or Alex Flum TV on any social media, you'll find me. But big thing, we have our show Game Night on DC News Now, which is every night at 11 p.m. We're the only 7-day-a-week sports show in the DMV. We enjoy what we do very much, covering everything high school, college, pros. So definitely tune into that. You can find your local listings on our website on dcnewsnow.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, George.
My thanks to Alex for the discussion. We'll definitely have him back a little later down the line. And a final quick note about what might be an ugly season for the Wizards. DraftKings Sportsbook projects their win total at 24.5. That's the worst among the NBA's 30 teams. A reminder that you can find the District of Sports wherever you get your podcasts. That includes Apple, Google, Spotify, TuneIn, and more. Just search District of Sports in your favorite podcast app. And a reminder to check out all of our sports coverage of teams around the DMV and beyond at WashingtonTimes.com/sports. I'm George Gerbo. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.